Hey you guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin'. Today we're talking about some of the biggest mistakes that we as bass anglers make in the springtime and what you can do about them so that you can start catching more fish. Spring is prime time. This is the best bass fishing of the year for most anglers. It's also one of the best shots, if not the best shot, to catch a giant bass. However, there are still plenty of anglers, and maybe you're one of them, who struggle to find those bigger fish, who struggle to catch numbers of fish at a time of year where other people are saying it's so easy. There are some key things that you can do or not do that will really screw up your chances. I mean, just point blank, the fishing can be amazing and you can still blow it. So today we're going to cover some of those simple things that you're probably overlooking. You probably haven't thought through. You might be doing, I do some of them. I've thought it through and I still do some of them. So you're probably in that same boat. You're probably doing some little things that are really shooting yourself in the foot and making it more difficult than it needs to be for you to catch fish. I've got a handful of mistakes that you might have overlooked and then sort of how to get around those things. And that's what I want to talk about today. The first one, in the springtime, you know, I want to think through the order I want to go through these. Probably the biggest one that I want to talk about is guys pushing too shallow. And what I mean by that is in the spring, bass make that first move shallow, right? Pre-spawn, going towards the spawn. It's one thing to be shallow fishing in the summertime, where bass have already spent months up shallow. It's no big deal. Those fish are used to shallow water. There's heavy cover around. They know where to go to get away from a passing boat or somebody standing on the shore. And they're pretty mellow up there in those shallows. But first thing in spring, when they make that push shallow, these fish for the most part are coming out of deep water. They haven't been shallow since last fall. And they're a little skittish about being up there. So they're a lot more likely to get spooked. They're a lot more likely to be cautious. And they're way more likely, if you do scare them, to leave and not come back. And that's a major thing that I think people miss. So there's a few ways that that plays out. But things that you need to think about. The first thing is you need to go out of your way to give the fish more room than normal. What I mean is, if I'm cruising down this shoreline and I've got my trolling motor turned up and I'm just plowing along up shallow, I'll probably catch some fish. But if I get a cast length off of the bank, or if I'm a shore angler, I stand way back from the shore and I intentionally reach farther, I'm way more likely to catch a lot of fish and to catch a big fish. So with that in mind, let's walk through the first couple of things that I see a lot of people doing wrong. The biggest one is making too much noise. And that really pertains to that shallow water fishing. Banging and clanging on the boat, one of the worst ones, and I'm gonna do it right now. Ready? My locker's quiet, I can't even slam it. There we go. When I don't wanna slam a locker, I sure know how to slam one. That boom, slamming a locker, that sends a shock wave out. It is so detrimental to your fishing. I've been in clear water and watched fish just scatter away from a boat when a locker lid gets slammed, or one that you really don't think about when you're heavy on your feet, walking on that deck, being loud. And I'm sure not gonna make casts around here after I did that. You wanna be light on your feet, careful not to slam your locker lids. One that nobody thinks about, or most people don't think about, maybe you do, is turning down that trolling motor if you're on a boat. We want to cover water, and we'll get to that. But if I'm plowing the shoreline on 8 or 9 or 10, those fish are hearing me from so much farther away that if I'm on 3 or 4 or 5 and I'm just cruising that shoreline, it makes a real difference. And then the last one, you know, a lot of people are all about electronics these days. And frankly, I love electronics. They impact my fishing in great ways most days. But when bass are shallow, turn that thing off. Take your units and turn them to standby so that you're not sending, I mean, we're up shallow. We're not looking at that stuff anyway. Turn it off. That ping that you're sending out there, that's hitting those fish that are coming up shallow for the first time, and it'll blow them out before you ever get to them. So when I'm fishing really shallow, I'm intentional about the noise that I'm making, as well as the noise that my boat is making, me on the boat and the boat itself. Sonar ping, like I do things like take my cell phone and make sure that it's not sitting on the floor. I'll set it on a seat. That way if it vibrates, that doesn't go out into the water. I mean, little stuff sounds silly, but it's a big deal, I'm telling you. So minimizing your noise is critical, particularly if you want to catch the giants. Little buck males pushing the shore, they're not always as cautious, but those giants, they've been around the block. The quieter you can be, the better. So think it through this year. Be intentional about being quieter on the boat. Then talking more about those shallows, that second one is not getting up there too shallow, right? Staying away from those fish like we just talked about. Longer casts intentionally. And this plays out both pre-spawn and spawn. Like when bass actually move up on beds, if a guy is sight fishing, I'll see those guys stand right over the top of those fish. That's brutal. Give those fish some space. The best thing you can do is buy quality glasses. These are Tim and I's glasses. These are tactical bass and sunglasses. We don't talk about them very often because Tim and I don't design things because we're trying to sell them to everybody. We don't care. We design things because there's a hole in the market that needs to be filled. We thought super high-end sunglasses, we understand the technologies and we understand how important they are, but we also knew the markups were insane. So Tim and I partnered up a few years ago with I Surrender and built glasses that have super high-end components, can see unbelievably well in water, and are way more affordable than high-end glasses. You know, things like that are critical. So get good glasses where you can see in the water and back off those fish. Give them as much space as possible and you'll be shocked. Spawning fish is an amazing place to understand bass behavior, even if you don't want to catch them. If you're one of those guys, you're a purist, I get it, you don't want to fish for those fish, but watch what happens if you set up 20 feet from a bedfish and just watch what it does, and then go slide up there near that fish and watch their behavior change, even without a bait going in the water. It's fascinating. So give those fish more space. One of the biggest mistakes that I see is guys will get snagged and go in to retrieve their lures. Now, you throw a $20 bait up there in 1.5 foot of water and it gets stuck, you're going to go get it. I would too. So you want to be intentional before that. Back it up. Don't throw baits in the shallows that will get snagged. Seriously, I'm not joking. I'm so intentional in spring. I've already got my boat off the bank. I've got my units powered down or set to standby because I'm fishing shallow. I've got my trolling motor turned down lower. I'm making longer casts and I am intentionally throwing lures that will not get snagged. This is all on purpose. When I fish with intention every day. That doesn't mean I catch them every day, but I fish with intention and that sets me up for success. So I grabbed a couple examples just so you guys would understand what I mean. If you throw up there shallow and you get stuck and you go in there, going back to what we talked about at the start, you're going to blow those fish out of those shallows. Particularly like fish that have pushed in a cove, you go plowing up there, it's over. And they may not even slide back in that day. They might pull out and stay out. So it's really important. We talk about that Bill Lewis ATV all the time. A square bill crankbait is a great way to fish shallow and not get snagged. But that ATV in particular, we talk about how weedless that bait is, how it's almost impossible to get it stuck. That's a huge deal. That's why we're throwing that bait, because I'm confident that I can fish shallow water targets and I'm not going to end up having to take my boat up there to get it unsnagged. Another one would be a swim jig. The swim jig is such an overlooked springtime bait. This in particular, it's a Dirty Jigs compact swim jig, which means it's a medium wire hook in a smaller shank size. So I'm able to fish an overall smaller package. Like that's a 4-inch swammer on there. And I can fish that thing on lighter line. I can cover tons of shallow water with it. And a swim jig, I mean, you can throw it over trees, through lily pads, all the way back in cattails. It doesn't matter. It'll come out of anything, anything. It's just one of those baits that you can rely on to cover shallow water, shallow cover, and know that you're not going to get hung up and go in there and screw it up. And then the last one is a topwater, right? A topwater, you're obviously not going to get that snagged in the shallows, but specifically poppers, some kind of popper. I tend to rely, this is a mega bass, this is a duo realis, but the important thing here is that they're very small profiled poppers. Now, I'll link all this stuff in the video description below the video, and I'll even give you like favorite colors, favorite sizes for all this stuff, so that if you want to fish the things that we fish, you can. But a small profiled popper. Again, these fish are nervous about that super shallow water, and I don't want to blow them out of there. So that smaller popper, it has less presence. It doesn't land as hard. It just, I can fish them slow, just bloop, let it sit. Bloop. This isn't like pow, pow, hard work in a popper. I'm just barely fishing it, letting those rings settle. And I find that I can get some of those early spring fish to commit to that thing when they won't touch other stuff. And you think, topwater, it's early season, I don't know if that'll work where I am. Fast moving baits, they might not. But a popper right over their head, I mean, if you're in the back of a cove and you're sending it and you're landing in 1.5 foot of water, you're only that far above a bass's head. It's nothing for that fish to rise on a slow moving popper and suck that thing up. It's nothing. You're right in their strike zone. Now, you might not be able to pull that fish to a walking bait in 8 feet of water, but a popper right there, no problem. So being intentional about baits that will not get snagged, that will still trigger bites, and you can stay back from those fish is a major, major thing. And then probably the last really big one, if I could give you one tip, one thing that I see almost everybody do, it's that they know to cover water in the spring, right? Fishing too slow is a major thing too. You want to speed up, you want to cover water, because fishing quickly allows you to find schools of fish. There's a lot of dead water in the spring. We talk about how fish will bunch up. They'll school in likely locations. Well, what we're not saying when we tell you that is that if the bass have schooled on point A, point B probably has no fish on it, right? Because they have grouped. Normally those fish should be spread down a shoreline. They've bunched up. That means all that is now garbage. So it's really important that you're covering water to run into them, because you'll have those days where you're like, this is a dead sea. I can't buy a bite out here. Where are these fish? I don't think they're even here. And you might be right. They might literally not be there. And you can figure that out without modern electronics, right? They're just not there. But if you cover water, you jump likely locations, you'll run into them. If you can catch one, you can almost always catch two. And if you can catch two, sometimes you can catch 25 in that one spot, because they are bunched up. It's a huge deal. So you want to cover water quickly. That's a major deal. But when guys are covering water quickly, I see them get lazy. And what I mean is a lot of guys will just straight retrieve. Like they're just going through the motions. They've forgotten about the actual act of catching the fish. They've forgotten about their presentation. They're throwing a crankbait, a spinnerbait, a chatterbait, an A-rig. I mean, I could go down the list. And they're just winding. Just chucking and winding. Be erratic with your retrieve. That is my #1 thing. If I could get you to do one thing different, even if you bang your lockers and go too fast and all the other things, be erratic with your retrieve and your catch rate will go up. So what I mean by that is intentionally throw those baits that work well when you're erratic and aggressive with them. You know, that square bill, we talked about that ATV for its ability to go crazy shallow and just not snag. We talk about the Rocco because the Rocco has the fastest startup speed of any square bill crankbait that I've ever fished. What I mean by that is that you can be erratic. So instead of doing this, you're doing this. Being erratic, start and stop, start and stop. If your bait's down there bouncing on bottom, it's naturally deflecting, changing course, and fish react to that. But if you're not hitting bottom, it's just going in a straight line. If you add those starts and stops, that creates that erratic movement, and those fish will trigger and react to that. You'll get a lot more bites throughout the day, and you will trigger big ones doing that. The Rocco, I'm not just playing this game. This thing starts to vibrate so quickly that I can play this game with it. A square bill, and I'm treating it almost like a jerkbait, just dancing it. So if I'm going down the shore, I'm just pausing it periodically. But if I see a stump, I'll throw past the stump, run it right up to the stump, pause, then twitch, 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 and it just dances by that piece of cover. It's amazing for that, and you'll get fish to react that you would not have pulled out with other baits. Same thing like the chatterbait. We talk a lot about the jackhammer. The jackhammer has the fastest startup speed of any chatterbait I've ever used. The new Evo will save you some money. It's almost as fast of a startup speed as a jackhammer, but we use the spunk shad on the back of that chatterbait because the spunk shad, when you start working and popping, it allows that chatterbait to dart and move in ways that other trailers don't allow a chatterbait to move. That's why we're very specific about what we're throwing. I throw the 5.5 size of that spunk shad a ton because the 5.5 has even more dance and movement in the tail than the 4.5. Those little things matter, they add up. And then the last one, the spinnerbait. That's one of those baits that guys just chuck and wind, chuck and wind. Even a spinnerbait can be danced and twitched underwater. I've lost count of the number of times I'm rolling a spinnerbait and I give that reel pop to flutter the blades, and right then, just boom, those fish are on it. It's incredible how many of the bites come when you add an erratic movement to your retrieve. So guys, those are some simple things. Some of them you might be doing, maybe you missed one of them, maybe you missed all of them. But if you can keep those things in mind, be quieter, give the fish more space. Don't go up there in those shallows with them. Throw baits so that you don't have to go up there. Don't get stuck. And then be more erratic, more aggressive with your retrieves while covering water, looking for schools of fish. And then when you find a school, by all means, camp out. Sit there, get those fish to react. Try different lures until they shut down, then keep moving. But cover water until you find them. And your spring will look completely different than it has in years past. It will make a big difference in your catch rate. Guys, I hope this helps you. I hope it inspires you to get out there on the water. If it does, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.